$6. My daughter needs a mother, said rancher. He bought 3 Apache women and made them his wives. He was a man shaped by the land, with strong hands, sun-baked skin, and eyes that held a quiet sadness. The ranch was his life, but it was also his loneliness. Years ago, he had lost his wife to an illness that left him with only one treasure, his young daughter, Emily. From the moment she had been born, Thomas devoted himself to her. He taught her how to ride a horse, how to fetch water from the well, and even how to recognize the different sounds of the animals around the ranch. Yet despite his love and care, he knew Emily needed more than just a father. She needed a mother, someone who could teach her the softer lessons of life, who could share the warmth and comfort that Thomas, for all his devotion, could not fully provide. The ranch was a lonely place. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and neighbors were few. The days were long and often quiet, broken only by the wind whistling through the hills and the lowing of cattle. Thomas had learned to keep to himself, to survive on what the land provided, and to accept the harshness of life. But as Emily grew older, he felt the weight of his solitude more keenly. He would watch her playing in the yard, her laughter bright and clear, and feel a pang of worry. She was intelligent, curious, and lively, but she was also young and impressionable. Thomas knew that he could not protect her from everything, and more importantly, he could not teach her about love and care in the way a mother could. One evening, as the orange glow of sunset filled the sky, Thomas sat on the porch, cradling a cup of coffee in his rough hands. Emily ran around the yard, chasing a small rabbit that had wandered too close to the fence. He smiled, but his smile was tinged with sadness. The ranch was his home, but it felt empty. He thought of the life he had once imagined with a family, the laughter of a wife, the comfort of companionship, and realized how much he missed those simple joys. He thought about the future and the kind of life he wanted for Emily. He wanted her to grow up happy, safe, and loved, with lessons of kindness and strength shared not just by him, but by a woman who could guide her in ways he could not. The next morning, Thomas made a decision. It was not an easy one, and he spent long hours thinking about it. He wanted to find someone who could become a mother to Emily, someone who could care for her as he did, but also bring a sense of family and warmth to their home. He knew the world was complicated, that life was not always fair, and that the people he sought might come from very different backgrounds. But he also knew that he could not wait any longer. The ranch, the plains, and the small cabin that had sheltered them for years would remain the same, but their lives could change. He had to take action. In the days that followed, Thomas traveled to the nearby town. It was a bustling place compared to his quiet ranch, with merchants, farmers, and travelers from distant lands. He asked questions discreetly, seeking guidance on how to find women who were willing to join him and help care for his daughter. He learned about the lives of women from the Apache community, who had faced hardships due to displacement, loss of their land, and struggles to survive in a changing world. He heard stories of their resilience, their skills in farming, cooking, and taking care of families. He thought that perhaps, in a way, they too were seeking safety and stability, just as he sought companionship and a mother for Emily. After careful consideration, Thomas arranged to meet 3 women who were skilled, resourceful, and strong in spirit. Each had her own story, her own journey filled with challenges and survival. He was respectful in his approach, aware that he could not force anyone to join him, but hopeful that they might see a shared future in the remote ranch where he lived. When he finally met them, he noticed the strength in their eyes, the quiet determination in their movements, and the grace with which they carried themselves. They had faced hardships he could only imagine, yet there was a warmth in their smiles, a hint of hope that mirrored his own desire for family. At first, there was tension. The women were cautious, wary of a man who lived alone on a remote ranch. They had seen much in their lives and knew the dangers of trusting too quickly. Thomas, too, was nervous. He wanted to convey honesty, kindness, and respect, yet he was acutely aware of the cultural differences and the complexities of the situation. Slowly, through conversation and shared stories, a fragile understanding began to form. Thomas spoke of Emily, of his desire to provide her with love and guidance, and of the challenges of life on the plains. The women listened, their expressions thoughtful, weighing the possibilities and the risks. Returning to the ranch was a journey filled with anticipation and quiet reflection. Thomas thought about the challenges ahead: teaching, sharing, and creating a household where everyone could live together peacefully. He also thought about Emily, imagining how her eyes would light up at the sight of these new women, the lessons she would learn, and the bonds that could form. He hoped they would all find strength in each other, learning to navigate a life that none of them had chosen lightly, but which they could shape together. Back at the ranch, Emily noticed a change in her father's demeanor. He was quieter, more thoughtful, but there was a spark in his eyes that suggested hope. She did not yet know of the women who might join their household, but she felt the anticipation, the sense that life could become richer and more vibrant. Thomas watched her playing with the animals, her laughter carrying across the open fields, and made a silent promise. No matter the challenges, no matter the difficulties, he would do everything in his power to ensure that Emily's world was filled with love, learning, and the warmth of family. As the weeks passed, Thomas prepared the ranch for the arrival of the women. He repaired fences, stocked the pantry, and ensured that the cabins were ready to accommodate them. He thought carefully about the integration of different lives, cultures, and routines, knowing that patience and understanding would be essential. He reflected on the nature of family, realizing that it was not always about conventional norms, but about connection, care, and mutual respect. He wanted Emily to understand that love could take many forms and that family could be built through trust, cooperation, and shared experiences. When the day finally came for the women to arrive, Thomas felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had imagined this moment countless times, yet reality was always different from dreams. As they approached the ranch, he greeted them with respect and warmth, offering assistance and guidance as they settled in. Emily, watching from the porch, felt a curious mixture of shyness and excitement. She had never seen anyone like them before, and yet she sensed a kindness and strength in their presence. The first evening together was quiet. They shared a simple meal, exchanged stories, and began the slow process of learning each other's rhythms and habits. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but there was also laughter, curiosity, and a shared sense of hope. Thomas observed carefully, guiding gently, ensuring that respect and patience prevailed. He understood that this was just the beginning, that building a family was a gradual process, requiring empathy, compromise, and mutual understanding. By the time night fell and the stars blanketed the sky, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had begun to transform into a home filled with the potential for connection, learning, and shared life. Thomas looked at Emily sleeping peacefully in her small bed and felt a deep sense of purpose. He knew that the journey ahead would not be simple, that challenges would arise, and that patience and understanding would be tested. Yet he also knew that with kindness, respect, and shared effort, they could build a family that was resilient, nurturing, and filled with love. In those quiet hours, with the wind whispering through the plains and the cattle resting in the fields, Thomas allowed himself to imagine a future that once seemed impossible. A future where Emily would grow up surrounded by care, wisdom, and affection, where differences could be bridged through understanding, and where life, though still challenging, could also be beautiful and meaningful. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was becoming a place of possibility, hope, and new beginnings. The morning sun shone brightly over the ranch, painting the wide fields with gold and green. Birds chirped as the wind gently rustled the leaves of the few scattered trees near the cabin. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon. Today was the day. The women he had met in town were finally coming to live at the ranch. He felt a mixture of anticipation, hope, and nervousness. For weeks he had prepared the cabins, stocked the larders, and made the ranch ready to welcome new lives. He wanted this transition to be smooth, knowing that patience and understanding would be the keys to creating a household that could work. Emily, unaware of the women's arrival until now, ran out to her father with a curious look in her eyes. "Daddy, are they coming today?" she asked, her voice bright with excitement. Thomas smiled gently and nodded. "Yes, Emily, they're on their way. But remember, they are different from us, and we need to be kind and patient. We will learn about each other together." Emily's eyes sparkled as she tried to imagine what the women would look like, how they would speak, and whether they would be friends or strangers. She ran back to the yard, thinking of all the games she might play and all the lessons she might learn from these new companions. It was not long before the sound of horses' hooves reached the ranch. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, signaling the approach of the three women. Each woman rode with quiet confidence, their eyes alert to the world around them. They had traveled a long distance, leaving behind the familiar to step into a new and uncertain life. Though they had faced hardships, each carried herself with a sense of strength and dignity. They were used to survival, to making careful decisions, and to navigating life in difficult circumstances. And now, they were about to enter a household unlike any they had known before. Thomas stepped forward as the women arrived, his voice calm and welcoming. "Welcome to our home. I hope the journey was not too hard." The women nodded politely, exchanging cautious glances. They were not used to strangers showing kindness, and yet something in Thomas's eyes suggested sincerity. One of the women, who introduced herself as Anissa, spoke first. Her voice was soft but steady. The ride was long but manageable. "Thank you for your welcome." Another woman named Taya gave a small smile and nodded, while the third, Leela, quietly observed the surroundings, taking in the ranch, the animals, and the simple cabins. Their eyes were curious but measured, trying to understand what kind of life awaited them. Thomas guided the women to the cabins, showing them the rooms prepared for each of them. He had chosen to respect their independence, giving each woman her own space while ensuring they could come together easily in shared areas. He explained the routines of the ranch, the tasks that needed attention, and how Emily's daily life unfolded. The women listened carefully, asking questions when necessary, and taking note of the work that would need to be done. Thomas spoke honestly, explaining that life on the ranch was not easy, but that with cooperation, respect, and understanding, they could make it a home for all of them. Emily, observing from the porch, was full of curiosity and excitement. She ran to meet the women, her small hands reaching out in friendship. "Hello, I'm Emily. Will you play with me?" she asked, her smile bright and inviting. The women exchanged glances, then Anissa knelt down to meet her eyes. "Hello, Emily. We would love to play with you," she said gently. Taya and Leela nodded in agreement, offering shy smiles. Emily laughed and grabbed their hands, pulling them toward the yard. It was a small, simple moment, but it was the first step toward building trust, understanding, and a sense of family. As the day unfolded, the women began to explore their new surroundings. They fed the chickens, collected firewood, and learned the routines of the ranch. Thomas watched carefully, guiding them when needed but allowing them to adjust at their own pace. He was aware that building relationships would take time, and that patience and respect were essential. The women, though cautious, were adaptable and resilient. They shared stories of their own past, teaching Emily about life beyond the ranch, about survival, and about the strength found in facing hardships. Emily listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the tales of courage and perseverance. The first meals together were quiet but meaningful. Thomas prepared simple dishes while the women observed, and soon they began sharing their own cooking skills. Anissa showed Emily how to prepare a stew using vegetables from the garden. Taya taught her to knead dough for bread, and Leela shared her knowledge of herbs and natural remedies. Emily was captivated by these lessons, learning not only practical skills, but also the value of cooperation and sharing. The women, in turn, began to understand the rhythms of life on the ranch and the challenges Thomas faced as a single father. Slowly, respect and trust began to grow, forming the foundation of their household. Evenings were the hardest for everyone at first. The long silence of the plains made conversation difficult, and the women sometimes felt unsure of how to connect with Thomas and Emily. But little moments began to change the atmosphere. A shared laugh over a spilled basket of vegetables, a story told by the fire, or a gentle smile exchanged across the yard all helped to build bonds. Thomas encouraged Emily to ask questions, to be curious, and to show kindness. He also encouraged the women to express their needs and feelings, knowing that open communication would be vital to creating a healthy home. Over the next few days, routines started to form. The women worked together to care for the animals, repair fences, and tend the garden. Emily observed and helped wherever she could, learning lessons in responsibility, patience, and teamwork. The women also shared cultural traditions, teaching Emily songs, dances, and simple crafts. These lessons were more than entertainment. They were ways of connecting, understanding, and creating a sense of belonging. Emily's laughter filled the ranch, and Thomas felt a relief and joy he had not known in years. He realized that the women were not just companions for Emily. They were guides, teachers, and friends who could help shape her future. Challenges arose, of course. There were moments of misunderstanding, small arguments, and frustrations as everyone adjusted to each other's habits and ways of life. Thomas reminded himself that this was natural, that building a family required patience, and that every difficulty was an opportunity to learn and grow together. The women, too, had to adjust to a life that was different from what they had known, learning to trust and to share responsibilities. Emily, in her innocence, sometimes struggled to understand differences, but she was learning empathy and acceptance through the guidance of her father and the women. As days turned into weeks, the household began to settle into a rhythm. The women had established themselves as caring, strong, and capable members of the family. Emily had formed bonds with each of them, learning to appreciate their differences and the unique qualities each one brought. Thomas felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a home filled with life, laughter, and shared purpose. The women's presence brought not only practical help, but also emotional warmth, creating a balance that Thomas had longed for. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas sat on the porch with Emily between his knees. The women were inside, preparing dinner together, their voices carrying faintly through the open windows. Thomas looked at Emily and saw a child growing in confidence, curiosity, and kindness. He knew that the journey ahead would still have challenges, but he felt hopeful. The women had brought more than skills. They had brought heart, patience, and understanding. Together, they were beginning to form a family, one built on respect, shared effort, and the quiet but strong bonds of care. The stars appeared one by one in the clear night sky, casting a gentle light over the ranch. The wind whispered through the trees, and the animals settled for the night. Thomas reflected on the past days, feeling gratitude for the courage of the women and the resilience of Emily. He understood that this was only the beginning of their journey together, that life on the plains would continue to test them, and that patience, empathy, and cooperation would be their greatest strengths. But he also knew that they had taken the first steps toward building a family that could endure, thrive, and find happiness in the face of hardship. In the quiet of that night, Thomas allowed himself to hope. He hoped that Emily would grow up surrounded by love, guidance, and the lessons of strength and kindness the women could provide. He hoped that the women would find a sense of security, respect, and belonging in their new home. And he hoped that together, they could create a life that was rich not just in survival, but in connection, learning, and the quiet joys of shared days. The ranch, once a lonely place, was becoming a home, a place where hearts could heal, bonds could form, and a family could begin to flourish. Life on the ranch began to take shape in new ways as the days passed. Thomas watched carefully as Anissa, Taya, and Leela settled into their new routines. The mornings were filled with the sounds of activity, the lowing of cattle, the clatter of buckets as water was carried, and the laughter of Emily as she played with the animals and helped the women with chores. Each woman brought her own skills and personality to the household, and gradually, a rhythm began to form. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, was now alive with the energy of 3 women learning to live together, and of Emily discovering the joys of shared life. At first, there were small challenges. Anissa preferred the early hours of the morning to begin work, while Taya liked to start tasks a little later. Leela, who was thoughtful and observant, often took her time, watching and learning before acting. Thomas tried to respect each woman's habits while keeping the ranch running smoothly. He realized that patience would be essential, not only for Emily's sake, but for the harmony of the household. He encouraged open communication, asking the women to share their thoughts, concerns, and suggestions. Slowly, they learned to adjust to each other's ways, discovering the balance needed to live together peacefully. Emily was fascinated by everything around her. She eagerly joined the women in their work, asking endless questions and absorbing new lessons. Anissa taught her how to gather firewood efficiently and safely, explaining why it was important to choose strong branches for warmth. Taya showed her how to tend the garden, plant seeds, and care for the vegetables, emphasizing patience and careful attention. Leela introduced Emily to simple methods of identifying herbs and natural remedies, teaching her which plants could be used for minor cuts or for cooking. Emily listened closely, eager to learn, and her eyes shone with curiosity. Each lesson was not just about skills, it was about life, responsibility, and the joy of discovery. The afternoons often brought the women together in shared tasks. They worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing meals for the family. Thomas, though he helped when necessary, mostly observed, letting the women guide Emily in learning. The kitchen became a place of laughter and gentle teaching. Mistakes were met with patience rather than frustration, and Emily quickly learned the value of persistence. She watched as Anissa rolled dough for bread, Taya stirred the stew, and Leela chopped vegetables carefully, each motion deliberate and precise. It was a lesson in teamwork, and Emily began to understand how people could work together to create something meaningful. Despite the progress, challenges occasionally arose. There were small arguments over tasks, misunderstandings about routines, and moments when the women's different approaches to life clashed. Anissa, who valued speed and efficiency, sometimes grew impatient when Taya or Leela took their time. Taya, who valued thoughtfulness and care, sometimes felt rushed by Anissa's urgency. Leela, the observer, occasionally felt caught between the two. Thomas recognized that these tensions were natural. He encouraged conversations that allowed the women to express their feelings, listen to each other, and find compromise. Slowly, these moments of friction became opportunities for growth, understanding, and stronger bonds. Evenings brought a different kind of challenge. The ranch, quiet and expansive, could feel isolating after a long day of work. Yet, the women made efforts to connect with Emily and Thomas in ways that were meaningful. They told stories of their past, sharing lessons learned from hardship and survival. Anissa spoke of times when she had cared for younger siblings, teaching Emily about responsibility and empathy. Taya shared experiences of tending gardens and livestock, explaining the importance of patience and consistency. Leela spoke softly about observing the world and learning from it, teaching Emily to notice details and appreciate the small things. These stories became a source of bonding, shaping Emily's understanding of life and family. The children's laughter and playful energy began to soften the women's initial caution. Emily would often invite them to explore the fields, climb trees, or play with the animals. At first, the women were hesitant, unused to such freedom and playfulness, but they soon discovered joy in sharing these moments. Emily's excitement was contagious, and the women began to relax, laughing and joining her in games. These small acts of connection built trust, warmth, and affection. Emily learned to appreciate the unique qualities of each woman, and the women, in turn, began to see themselves as part of a family rather than just temporary helpers on a ranch. One of the most significant lessons came from shared problem-solving. When a sudden storm threatened the livestock, the women and Thomas worked together to secure the animals, repair damaged fences, and ensure that Emily was safe. Anissa took charge of gathering the cattle, Taya organized the supplies and food, and Leela helped keep Emily calm while showing her how to help in small ways. Thomas directed their efforts, praising teamwork and courage. By the time the storm passed, everyone was exhausted but relieved. The experience reinforced the value of cooperation, and Emily understood that facing challenges together made people stronger and closer. The household also began to learn from cultural exchanges. The women shared traditions, songs, and simple games from their past. Emily listened with wonder, absorbing the richness of these stories and practices. Thomas appreciated the learning as well, realizing that life was not only about survival on the ranch, but also about understanding the world through different perspectives. He encouraged Emily to ask questions, explore new ideas, and respect differences. The women, too, learned about Thomas's ways of living, his routines, and his connection to the land. Slowly, they created a shared culture that blended old knowledge with new experiences, forming the foundations of a unique family identity. There were quiet moments as well, when Emily and the women would sit by the fire, weaving simple crafts, or watching the sun set over the plains. These times were gentle and peaceful, allowing the household to rest, reflect, and strengthen their bonds. Emily began to understand that family was not only about living together, but also about sharing time, attention, and care. She learned empathy, patience, and the joy of connection. The women found comfort in each other's presence, realizing that support, respect, and kindness could transform a group of strangers into a cohesive, loving household. As the weeks passed, small victories marked their progress. The garden flourished under the women's care, the animals were healthier and calmer, and Emily's skills and confidence grew daily. Thomas saw the change in his daughter. She was learning responsibility, kindness, and resilience, while also developing strong relationships with the women who now shared their home. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of joy. The ranch became a place of learning, growth, and nurturing, rather than just work and survival. The women also learned to navigate their own relationships. They discovered ways to support one another, balance differing opinions, and celebrate each other's strengths. Anissa's decisiveness complemented Taya's careful planning and Leela's thoughtfulness. Emily witnessed these interactions and learned that understanding and compromise were important in all relationships. Over time, the household developed a rhythm that allowed each person to contribute meaningfully, feel respected, and experience a sense of belonging. One evening, after a long day of work and laughter, Thomas stood on the porch, looking out over the fields. The women were inside, sharing a quiet meal, and Emily's laughter echoed from the barn where she had been helping feed the animals. Thomas reflected on the journey so far. The days had been filled with hard work, learning, and adjustment, but also with small victories, trust building, and moments of happiness. He realized that creating a family was a process, one that required patience, empathy, and understanding. But he also saw the beginnings of something wonderful, a household built on respect, cooperation, and shared love. In the quiet of the night, as stars filled the sky and the wind whispered through the trees, Thomas felt hope. He hoped that Emily would grow up strong, compassionate, and wise, shaped by the lessons and love of the women who had joined their household. He hoped that the women would find fulfillment, connection, and purpose in their new home. And he hoped that together, they could continue building a family that was resilient, caring, and capable of facing any challenge life might bring. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a home, a place of growth, learning, and the beginnings of lasting bonds. Life on the ranch was no longer quiet. Days were filled with laughter, work, and learning, but they also brought new challenges. Thomas observed the household closely, knowing that the bonds they had begun to form were still fragile. The women, Anissa, Taya, and Leela, had settled into routines, but their differences sometimes caused tension. Anissa's decisiveness often clashed with Taya's careful and methodical approach. Leela, who was thoughtful and observant, sometimes felt caught between the two. Thomas knew that navigating these differences would be a delicate task. He also understood that Emily, though young and cheerful, could feel confusion when the adults around her disagreed. Patience, empathy, and guidance were more important than ever. One morning, a small disagreement over chores highlighted these differences. Anissa wanted to gather firewood immediately, believing it was important to prepare for the coming week. Taya, however, felt the fields and garden should be tended first, so the vegetables would not be harmed. Leela suggested they split tasks, but Anissa insisted on her plan, and Taya argued in return. Thomas watched quietly, aware that stepping in too quickly could prevent them from learning to communicate. Finally, he spoke calmly, "Let's take a moment. Each task is important and we can find a way to do both. If we work together, everything can be completed and no one will feel overlooked." Slowly, the women nodded, realizing that compromise was the solution. They divided the work, helping each other while explaining their reasons. Emily watched closely, learning an early lesson about negotiation, empathy, and teamwork. The days continued with a mix of routine and small adventures. Emily often followed the women through the ranch, eager to help and learn. She learned how to feed the animals, mend fences, and even assist with cooking. Each task carried a lesson, not only in skills but also in responsibility, patience, and understanding. The women, in turn, began to see Emily as more than a child to be cared for. She was an eager student, a source of joy, and a small but essential part of their new household. They shared stories, taught her skills from their own pasts, and celebrated her achievements, however small. Emily's eyes shone with pride when she succeeded, and the women's gentle praise encouraged her to keep learning. Yet life was not always easy. The ranch, set in a remote area, was subject to the harshness of nature. A sudden storm one afternoon tested the household's ability to work together. Strong winds and heavy rain threatened the garden and the animals. Thomas called everyone to action, assigning tasks to each woman while keeping Emily safe. Anissa led the effort to secure the livestock, Taya ensured the garden was protected, and Leela guided Emily in carrying buckets of water to help. It was hard work, exhausting but necessary. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch intact and the household feeling proud of what they had accomplished together. Emily hugged each woman tightly, her laughter echoing across the soaked fields. That day, they all realized that facing challenges together made them stronger and closer. As the household grew stronger, outside pressures began to make themselves known. Neighbors and travelers passing by occasionally raised questions about the unconventional household. Some were curious, others skeptical. Thomas had long learned to ignore idle gossip, but he could see the subtle unease it caused the women at first. They were cautious, unsure how others would perceive them and wary of judgment. Thomas reassured them, saying, "We are building our home the way that works for us. Others may not understand, but our focus is on kindness, respect, and family. That is what matters." Slowly, the women began to feel more confident, learning to trust Thomas's guidance and to find strength in their shared purpose. Emily's perspective became increasingly important in these moments. She loved her new family and was proud of their unity. She often reminded the women to stay cheerful, suggesting simple games or songs to lift spirits. Her innocence and positivity helped everyone navigate moments of doubt. The women began to appreciate Emily's unique role, seeing her as a bridge between their different experiences and the life Thomas had built. Together, they began to develop a deeper understanding of each other, finding ways to honor their differences while building a household that was strong, loving, and cohesive. Daily life also brought lessons in culture and tradition. The women shared their knowledge of plants, herbs, and natural remedies, teaching Emily about the healing properties of leaves, roots, and flowers. Taya showed her how to store food safely and prepare simple meals, while Leela taught her songs and stories from her past. Anissa shared lessons about hard work, leadership, and observing nature. Emily absorbed these lessons eagerly, learning not only skills but also values. She understood that life required balance between work and play, tradition and change, independence and cooperation. Thomas watched her growth with pride, seeing the way she blossomed under the guidance of the women and the lessons of daily life. Evenings became a time for reflection and connection. After the day's work was done, the household gathered together by the fire. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and laughter filled the small cabins. Sometimes they spoke of hardships from the past, learning from each other's experiences. Other times they dreamed of the future, imagining what the ranch could become and how Emily would grow. Thomas encouraged openness, reminding everyone that each voice mattered and that listening to one another strengthened their bonds. The women learned to support each other, offer guidance without judgment, and celebrate small successes together. Over time, Emily began to notice subtle changes in the women. Anissa, once strict and focused on efficiency, began to show patience and humor. Taya, careful and methodical, learned to be flexible when unexpected events occurred. Leela, quiet and observant, grew more confident in her decisions and more willing to speak up. Emily learned from these transformations, seeing that adaptation, compromise, and growth were natural parts of life. She began to understand that family was not perfect, but it was resilient, capable of facing difficulties with care and cooperation. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Emily noticed a small argument brewing between Anissa and Taya. They disagreed on how to organize the harvest, voices rising slightly in frustration. Emily paused, remembering what she had learned about compromise. She suggested, "Why don't we split the work and help each other finish faster? That way everyone is happy." Both women paused, realizing the wisdom in her words. They nodded and laughed, appreciating her insight. Thomas, who had been watching from a distance, smiled quietly. Emily had begun to understand not only practical skills, but also leadership, empathy, and the power of gentle guidance. The ranch continued to flourish, both in crops and in relationships. The women learned to celebrate small victories, bountiful harvests, healthy animals, or even a well-cooked meal. Emily's laughter and curiosity brought warmth and joy, reminding everyone of the importance of play and exploration. Thomas, though still focused on work, allowed himself to enjoy these moments, seeing the household grow into something more than just survival. They were building a life together, a family shaped by care, effort, and understanding. At night, under the wide, star-filled sky, Thomas often reflected on how far they had come. The women had grown more confident, Emily had grown wiser, and the household had developed routines and bonds that allowed them to thrive. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Differences would continue to appear, storms would test their abilities, and outside judgment would remain a distant concern. But Thomas felt hope. He saw that the women were not just helpers, they were guides, teachers, and companions. Emily was not just a child to protect, she was a source of inspiration, joy, and connection. Together, they were becoming a family capable of facing life's challenges. The wind whispered through the trees, and the sounds of animals settling for the night filled the air. The women moved quietly through the cabins, sharing small smiles and gentle words with Emily. Thomas sat on the porch, sipping his tea, and looked out across the fields. The ranch, once a place of loneliness, had transformed into a home filled with activity, learning, and love. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of connection. And though the journey was far from over, he knew that together they could navigate whatever life had in store. By the end of this period, the household had truly begun to feel like a family. Trust had deepened, routines had stabilized, and each member understood her role in the shared life they were building. They had faced disagreements, storms, and challenges, but through patience, respect, and cooperation, they had grown stronger. Emily's laughter and curiosity had become a guiding light, inspiring everyone to be their best selves. Thomas felt a quiet pride, knowing that the foundation of love, understanding, and shared effort was strong enough to carry them through the future. Time had passed since the three women, Anissa, Taya, and Leela, had joined Thomas and Emily on the ranch. Life had not always been easy, but over months of shared work, learning, and laughter, the household had grown into something strong and loving. The women had become more than companions. They were guides, teachers, and friends, helping shape Emily into a kind, confident, and curious child. The ranch, once a lonely and quiet place, now resonated with life. The animals thrived under care, the garden flourished, and the cabins echoed with laughter, music, and the hum of daily activity. Each morning began with purpose. Emily rose early, often waking before the others, eager to see what the day would bring. She would help feed the chickens and collect eggs while learning to observe the habits of the animals. Anissa, always practical and decisive, organized the morning tasks, ensuring that work was done efficiently. Taya, careful and methodical, supervised the garden and the planting of new seeds, making sure that each plant received the attention it needed. Leela, thoughtful and gentle, helped Emily with smaller tasks and shared lessons about nature, animals, and the land. Together, they worked as a team, finding harmony in differences and creating a balance that made life on the ranch smoother and more joyful. Emily had grown considerably during this time. She moved confidently through the ranch, understanding the responsibilities that came with caring for animals, plants, and household duties. She was patient, careful, and attentive, but she also retained the playful energy that brought joy to the household. The women encouraged her curiosity, teaching her skills that went beyond chores. She learned how to bake bread from Taya, gather herbs and make simple remedies with Leela, and manage work with efficiency from Anissa. More importantly, she learned lessons about kindness, respect, cooperation, and empathy, values that could guide her for the rest of her life. The household continued to face challenges, both expected and unexpected. One season, a harsh drought tested their resourcefulness. The garden needed careful attention, water had to be rationed, and the animals required extra care. Thomas, the women, and Emily worked together tirelessly, finding ways to conserve resources, repair irrigation, and ensure that everyone had what they needed. They shared tasks, learned from each other, and adapted to the situation with patience and creativity. The drought was difficult, but it became a lesson in resilience, problem-solving, and teamwork. By the time the rains returned, the household had grown stronger and more confident in their ability to face adversity. Over time, small traditions began to form within the household. Sunday afternoons became a time for storytelling, music, and games. Anissa would tell tales of survival and courage, drawing from her own experiences. Taya shared lessons about patience, careful planning, and the value of attention to detail. Leela taught songs, shared customs from her past, and introduced Emily to quiet moments of reflection and appreciation for nature. Emily participated eagerly, sharing her own stories and ideas, and finding joy in the connections she had with each woman. These moments of shared culture, learning, and laughter created bonds that were as strong as those built through daily work. The women's presence also allowed Thomas to see life in new ways. He had long been focused on survival and work, but the household's laughter, creativity, and shared experiences reminded him of the beauty of companionship. He appreciated the women not only for their skills and care for Emily, but also for the way they enriched his own life. Evenings spent together by the fire, sharing meals, or discussing plans for the ranch became moments of joy and reflection. Thomas realized that family was not about perfection, but about love, understanding, and shared effort. He felt gratitude for the women's courage in joining his household and for the way they had helped create a warm, thriving home. Emily continued to learn about relationships, respect, and empathy through observing the women. She noticed how they supported each other, offered guidance without judgment, and celebrated each other's strengths. She saw that compromise and patience were essential in maintaining harmony, and she learned that expressing gratitude and kindness strengthened bonds. These lessons were subtle but powerful, shaping Emily into a child who understood the value of love, cooperation, and mutual respect. Thomas watched proudly as his daughter grew into someone capable of understanding and appreciating the complexity and beauty of human relationships. The seasons changed, bringing new tasks, challenges, and joys. Spring brought planting and growth, summer required tending and protecting the garden, autumn brought the harvest, and winter demanded careful planning and preparation. Through it all, the household adapted, worked together, and learned from each challenge. Emily took part in every season's work, gaining confidence and a sense of responsibility. She learned that life required effort, patience, and attention, but also that rewards came from perseverance, teamwork, and care. The women celebrated her successes, praised her efforts, and encouraged her curiosity, nurturing her in ways Thomas alone could not. The women also developed close bonds with one another. Anissa's decisiveness balanced Taya's careful planning, and Leela's observation and thoughtfulness often helped mediate disagreements. They learned to respect each other's differences, support one another through challenges, and celebrate successes together. Emily witnessed these interactions and learned that relationships required effort, understanding, and empathy. She saw firsthand how trust, patience, and cooperation could transform a group of individuals into a cohesive, loving family. One afternoon, a visitor from the town came to the ranch, curious about the unusual household. At first, the women were nervous, unsure how the visitor would react. Thomas reassured them, reminding them that they had built a strong, respectful household, and that their focus should remain on their family. The visitor was impressed by the efficiency, cooperation, and warmth of the household. Emily proudly showed the garden, the animals, and the well-maintained cabins. The women spoke confidently about their roles, their routines, and the lessons they had taught Emily. By the end of the visit, the women realized that their family could withstand curiosity, judgment, and external pressures, because they had built a foundation of respect, love, and teamwork. As the years passed, Emily grew older, more confident, and more capable. She had learned a wealth of skills from the women: cooking, gardening, caring for animals, understanding nature, and solving problems. But even more importantly, she had learned about empathy, patience, kindness, and the value of working together. The women had become her mentors, her friends, and her guides, teaching her lessons that would last a lifetime. Thomas watched with pride as his daughter blossomed, confident in the knowledge that she was growing up in a home filled with love, learning, and mutual respect. The household also faced personal growth. The women, who had arrived as strangers, had transformed their lives alongside Thomas and Emily. They found a sense of belonging, purpose, and fulfillment in the shared work, teaching, and care for Emily. Each woman had discovered her strengths, her capacity for compassion, and her ability to form deep, meaningful relationships. They learned that family was not only about blood or tradition, but about shared effort, mutual respect, and love. Their experiences on the ranch became a source of pride, resilience, and connection, shaping their identities in profound and lasting ways. Evenings continued to be a time of connection, reflection, and celebration. The household would gather by the fire, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. Emily often told stories of her day, proud of the lessons she had learned and the work she had accomplished. The women listened with encouragement, offering advice, gentle corrections, and praise. Thomas watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that the journey they had taken together, through adjustment, challenges, and learning, had created a family that was strong, resilient, and capable of facing life together. By the time Emily was ready to attend the town school, she was confident, curious, and knowledgeable. She carried with her the lessons of the ranch, the wisdom of the women, and the love of her father. The transition to the school was smooth, as she had been well prepared to face the world beyond the ranch. The women, proud of her accomplishments, continued to guide and support her, ensuring that she understood the importance of kindness, learning, and perseverance. Thomas felt joy and pride, knowing that Emily had grown into a capable, thoughtful, and compassionate young girl. The household had become a model of love, patience, and cooperation. Through work, play, and shared experiences, Thomas, Emily, and the three women had built a life that was rich in care, understanding, and mutual respect. They had faced challenges together, storms, droughts, misunderstandings, and external judgments, but each obstacle had strengthened their bonds. The ranch, once a lonely place, was now a home full of life, learning, and love. Emily's laughter and curiosity continued to inspire the women and her father, reminding them of the joy and beauty of family. In the quiet nights, under the vast sky filled with stars, Thomas often reflected on their journey. He realized that what they had built was more than a household. It was a family created through respect, patience, and love. The women had become an essential part of Emily's life, guiding her, teaching her, and nurturing her growth. Emily had brought joy, curiosity, and connection to the women and Thomas. Together, they had created a life that was meaningful, resilient, and full of hope. And as the years continued, they would face the future together, strong in the knowledge that love, cooperation, and mutual respect were the foundations of a lasting family.